All right, good evening. Welcome everyone in attendance. I know we're going to hear from you very soon, but let me do some businessy stuff first. I'm calling the Wilton Board of Education meeting to order on October 20th. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thanks, Ruth. Second. Thanks, Pam. All in favor? All right. Are there any comments from the public? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you.
A second.
All in favor? All right. This brings us to the best part of the meeting, our salute to excellence. This is a practice that was started three years ago by Dr. Smith and the chairman of the board at the time, Chris Finkelstein. And so we take very randomly in terms of timing, but the superintendent and the staff select programs that they feel are deserving of special recognition by the board and by the public. So this evening, we are delighted to have another award, a Salute to Excellence, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Smith to do the introduction.
Great. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody, and welcome to our viewers at home. We're so very pleased tonight to recognize and celebrate our unified sports team, Wilton United, and also announce that Wilton High School has again been recognized as a Special Olympics Unified Champion School, which is tremendous. Schools are recognized for demonstrating an inclusive school climate, exuding a sense of collaboration, engagement, and respect for all members of the student body and staff. And Unified Champion schools that receive this national banner recognition have had to meet 10 national standards of excellence. So these standards assess Special Olympic Unified Sports programs, inclusive youth leadership practices, and whole school engagement. So tonight, joining us to celebrate and to present the banner from the SEAC is Paul Mengold, who drove down this evening from Woodbridge. Our high school staff that are here are Mr. Elias Zarita, Emily Rappel, and Patty Berkowitz. And then we have a number of our students. I see Alan and I see Emma, as well as a number of their mentors. So what I'm going to ask is that all of our students and staff come forward. We're going to just gather right around me here, and then I know a few of you have a few things you want to say, so come on up. So come in, you guys are just like file right in shoulder to shoulder here.
Good.
Great, this is perfect. So why don't we have Mr. Mengold come up, and we'll have you present the banner, and if there's a few things you want to say, we'll start with you. Thank you. We can have our friends hold the banner, and then I know we want to hear from Emma and a few others.
So, I know it's a rather tall banner, which is, I don't want to hide you from the pictures that may be occurring right now.
Those things don't come in blue and white. They're new Canaan colors.
Sorry,
Put in a request for next time.
we'll have to hit the colors. Congratulations. This is certainly a well-deserved honor. Dr. Smith stole a little bit of my thunder in his presentation, but everything he said was right on target. For those of you who don't know anything about unified sports or have never been to a unified sporting event, I think you're missing one of the greatest things that happens in a high school setting and a middle school setting. In Connecticut, we have about approximately 135 high schools that are actively involved in this, Wilton being one of the best. We also have about 85 middle schools. We're starting to grow that back. I mean, obviously the pandemic threw that off out of our lane for a little bit, but we're coming back strong. And I can't thank you enough for supporting it financially, and your great leadership, Dr. Smith, and our principal, I don't know where she...
Dr. O'Donnell.
Yeah, thank you. And our coaches, all right, who are here this evening. One was a former student of mine, and happy to see her actively involved in unified sports. But they do a wonderful job. And the things that Dr. Smith said about all the 10 factors, this is a national award. This comes from Special Olympics North America. And there are over 1,000 applications for this award, and only 5 schools in Connecticut got this award, and it's wonderful that it would happen again after a 4-year tenure and then to come back. So, your support, your athletic director's support, which makes this happen. Without the athletic director, it's kind of an uphill battle, and we see that with a lot of schools. But our coaches and your financial support and recognizing it, it also, your support makes it sustainable, a sustainable program. Many schools do not have paid coaches, and therefore what happens is a big transition, and then we lose programming and we start all over. So it's wonderful that you can find it. I don't think you'll find, and having been a former athletic director, this is the highlight of athletics, and it's what athletics is all about. And you guys have done a wonderful job, and I'm sorry it took so long.
You're doing fine.
But
It's okay.
it's well worth my time and your efforts, all of you, to put on such a great product and a great school and a tremendous unified sports program. And for those of you who don't know what unified sports is, it's a collaboration with students with disabilities, partnering with students without disabilities, and participating in a wide range, not just athletics, as Dr. Smith said. And so I thank you again for supporting it, and congratulations on a great award, and hang that with pride.
Yeah, thanks again. So, Emily, we have someone else who wants to share a few words?
You're gonna talk to everyone.
Hey, Miss Emma.
And just make sure your voice is up all the way. Okay, ready?
Thank you everyone for coming. I love unified sports. I get to play soccer with my friends. My coaches help me a lot. Thank you for this award. Go Unified Sports.
All right, very, very well done. Thank you. Thank you, Emily, for you and the team. So in addition to the banner, a small table.
Awesome.
Right, so we'll hang that with pride. We'll have a banner hanging ceremony like we do with the rest of our championship banners. We want to thank Bobby Rushton and our athletic program for supporting this program so well. We know they're going to continue their support, and we're going to, we'll be back again in 4 more years.
All right.
Yeah, just tell us where to look.
We got it? We got it?
Coach,
Get in there, Coach Z.
And now center, everybody. Thank you.
Perfect.
Great.
Awesome.
We're good.
All right.
You wanna hang this in the classroom tomorrow? Yeah.
Of course I'm going to be in tomorrow.
Mr. Mango, thank you.
Yes.
Emma, you did awesome.
I see, I mean, in Fairfield. Are you going to come see me? See you in Fairfield.
Now you can stay for the rest of the
be careful. I'm sure we got some AP classes we got to study for. We got senior night, we got a lot going on in public school. So you are absolved from attending the board meeting. All right, come back in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes?
Thank you, everyone.
All right, Coach Z, appreciate it. Never doubt what we're about.
That should be on the t-shirt.
Andrea is the queen of the
I like the
t-shirts.
W, never doubt what we're about.
It's good. I think I'll write that down.
I think you should. Yeah.
Never doubt what we're about.
Yeah, with a W.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's a good shirt. That is a good shirt.
That is a good shirt.
I think you're right. Stand by, holiday's coming.
That's the thing, just kind of popped out. You don't even have to think.
These guys, just amazing.
That was amazing.
They are, and you know, Paul was right. If you,
If you've never been to a unified
Oh, yeah.
sports day, tournament here, I can't recommend.
I'm gonna have to put it on my
enough.
list.
Your face will hurt at the end from smiling.
Yeah.
It's joyous and it's the best thing ever. So if you've never been, I'll let you know when the next one is. They're great.
Yeah.
I follow Patch,
yes,
who I've known since he was 18 months, so, yeah. It's pretty great.
Pretty great.
Really great.
That was all great and probably the highlight of our evening, but we will
What would be
proceed
hot
still.
topic?
I know, it's hard to follow that.
Here comes the buzzkill.
Well, just for that, I'm not going to give a board chair's report.
No,
Bye.
there's good stuff.
I'm not. I'm just kidding. Superintendent, you're up.
all right. Well, listen, you know, it's, I like to highlight and celebrate.
Kevin, that was a good day.
Right.
Because the sun came out home.
I know.
Yeah, let's go.
I know.
We do have, there is some other good, I mean, this was a highlight, but we do have some other good news. Last night, I think some of us were together for an hour or so down in the Clune. We had our middle school, high school combined chorus concert. And if you didn't make it, and I think most of the town was there because you couldn't find a seat if you needed one, you can find the link online. It was terrific. So we want to congratulate all of our music teachers who participated. Francesca Gray, who's new to us this year, working with Janet Nobles at Middlebrook. Will Mandelbaum, who is also new to us this year, working at the high school with Malcolm Carlin. And Mike Gordon was there also helping facilitate. So they just did a terrific job. Since last we met, we received news that in addition to our 12 National Merit semifinalists, 29 other members of the class of 23 have been recognized as commended students. So that means those students placed among the top 5% nationally on the PSAT and MSQT back in 2021. So we want to congratulate all of those students. And then last just a little bit. We'll have Bobby come back at the end of the fall sports season to give us an update, but the season's been really successful so far. It is rapidly coming to an end. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, our varsity girls cross-country team had their FCAC championship and placed third. Grace Guglielmo and Maya Salvino each earned first team All-FCAC. Sasha Langholm and Leah Lombardi earned second team All-FCAC, and Erin Kelly, one of our freshmen, won the freshman girls race for the FCAC. So that was pretty exciting. And then on the boys' side, Mikey Burns earned first team All-FCAC, and Alex Cohen earned second team All-FCAC. So it's been a good week.
That
That's
is
it for
good.
my report.
All right.
Maybe now we should go home.
All in favor?
Just want to go home.
Okay. Committee reports. I short-circuited the meeting for this topic last time, so I apologize, but let's make up for it now. So teaching and learning, I know you have met, so
We met October 4th, and we talked about 6141s. There are 7 coming your way. Physics 2, 2-3, Sandra Tallman and Scott Durkee presented. American Sign Language 4, Amy Broderick presented. Music Technology 2 was Malcolm Carlin and Niall Reynolds. Sports Broadcasting was Maria Naeem and Fran Kompar. And Podcasting and AP Seminar were presented by Ken Denaj and Fran Kompar. I think I'm going to leave it at that because it's all coming for you guys to just
Great.
go over, and I think
Sure.
it'll be presented at a board meeting.
AP Research.
And then in general, we just talked a little bit about 6141s and wondering what happens once all of these are approved. And can we go back at some point and kind of hear how they're going? The ones that we have approved, or maybe just even other ones. And then we'd asked a question about what happens, how do you remove a course from the list? Like, how does that ever happen, or does it ever happen? We talked about the summer intervention program survey results. Lynn Driver presented, and about a third of the students' families responded. Overall, the feedback was really positive. The one ask was to find out earlier to help with planning, which I think is challenging in identifying that early who needs support at the end. And then we talked about maybe doing surveys, now that we have one ready to go, maybe doing it right after summer program stops. And the last thing we talked about was Banned Books Week. There's a committee forum to look into it, to read, to discuss. In short, I think it was determined that the positives outweigh the negatives. And maybe moving forward, we would take a look at everything that was going to be up there, and keeping in mind our audience and what's going on in the world today, and make some decisions about how it was presented, and maybe the signage that was on the table with the books that were there. And that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Policy, communications?
Yeah, so we had also met on October 4th. We have a long list of policies that we're working through, and I read them off last time, and we kind of divided them into categories of things that need additional work and need legal review, things that are just technical and will come in the next few weeks, and things, and some of them that are on the redo category. But just to highlight everything, it was the selection of school library materials that needs additional work to it, work experience internship in community service program, that's just technical. The comprehensive planning policy is going to have a redo of its language, along with the suicide and prevention and intervention policy. Staff development policy needs a little bit of work to it. Student production of goods and services, this is an old one. We're not quite sure the purpose that it serves, so we're going to investigate further and also have a legal eye put to it. Placement of special education services, we just need to make sure that the legal language is still appropriate, and the technical language it still matches today. Pilot programs and research projects also need some work, along with Sunday activities, but those are more of the technical nature, and along with the prohibition and recommendations for psychotropic drugs.
Okay, thank you. And business operations?
So we met this morning at 7:30, and the sun did come out. But in spite of that, we had to sort of listen to Andrea talk about the outplacement for day schools. But starting November 1st, we'll have an increase in their tuitions. And so that will impact us going forward. We talked about electrical and fuel compromising budget-wise. Miller Driscoll and Millbrook have solar panels, so that's very helpful, but the other schools are kind of using a lot of electricity and a lot of fuel, and Dawn, of course, will update us all on that in a more specific way, but it was a bit of a hard meeting this morning. It didn't last very long, but the sun did come out, so Kevin was pretty optimistic at the end. But we had to hear some hard stuff, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Well, on that note, let's plunge right into the financial report. Yeah. Well, nothing's blown up. It's just, there isn't a whole lot of lightness either, right?
The financials before you are September financials, which is the first full month of school. The numbers that you see do include the custodian retro pay that we had talked about at the last financial the last financial update. Those are included within those numbers. What is not on the unbudgeted amount was the Ceridian conversion. And if you remember, I talked about Ceridian conversion was the old payroll, third-party payroll software. When New World was implemented, they never brought over the history of payroll. So we need to bring the history into New World because Ceridian is no longer going to support us with it. That came in at an estimate of about $18,000. That is not part of the numbers yet. That project is still ongoing. And as you may recall, we froze the budget on September 27th as a precaution to our rising special education costs, the concern for the excess cost reimbursement, and our rising utility costs. We did talk about the utility costs this morning. While some of our utilities are trending similar to last year at this time, two of them are running slightly higher than what we would like to see around this time. That's the building fuel and electricity. One would say, well, we have the solar panels. Are we getting a savings from using the solar panels? We are seeing a savings, but part of the bill, and I'm not an expert on electricity, so bear with me on this, is the delivery or demand part, and that part, I believe, is the bill. They can increase the rate on that, and we have no say over it. The usage or the supplier part of it is our usage times a rate. That we can control based on our usage, and we do get a reduction on our electric bill for the solar production that we have. Solar production is calculated and captured by a third-party vendor, and then we do pay a small fee to that vendor for the work that they do. So all in all, it's kind of the same as we were last month. Not a lot has changed, but we are still watching the accounts at this point.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
Was the increase in tuition payment coming in November, was it higher than expected?
We have never before had a mid-year rise in tuition.
Okay.
We received letters beginning yesterday with schools. Part of the issue is this private schools are having difficulty staffing because of the shortage of special education teachers, and so they're paying huge premiums to get special ed teachers, and we're passing the costs of that on to us.
Okay. So there's no kind of contractual component.
The students who are currently placed
Okay.
have a contracted
Okay.
tuition rate.
Okay.
It's for anyone who is placed from November 1st on, will have the new rate.
Okay.
And I think after this morning, we found out that's typically a few kids during a year.
During the year.
But there's still no perfect way of predicting that.
Okay.
Right.
Any other questions or comments? And Dr. Smith, do you want to just briefly talk about our meeting with the Board of Finance, just to summarize?
Sure. Yeah, so...
Sorry to surprise you.
Yeah,
but
no
I just
problem.
realized not everybody was
Of
there.
course, so last Tuesday, Debbie and I joined the Board of Finance, and I talked them through some of the information I shared with all of you at our last meeting, and just tried to forecast for them some of the challenges we're confronting as we move into this next budget planning cycle, including the expiration of the ARPA grants, the challenges we have around special education outplacement, tuition costs, and, you know, I think what I heard back, and, you know, Debbie, you can confirm this, they were generally appreciative to have the information sooner. I think, you know, my sense is also in kind of chunking it, because there's a lot, as you know, to absorb. So going forward, what we'll continue to do is take some opportunities. I think the next round we'll spend some time really looking at utilities and utilities forecasting, whatever else we can put together. We'll spend some time here with you talking through that much more in depth, but then pay another visit to them, and we'll try to do that on a more routine schedule leading into the budget planning, the more formal budget planning meetings that we have. And I would hope that, you know, we'll just have a richer dialogue as a result when we get to that point of the school year.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and just to reiterate what you said, or emphasize it, is the members of the Board of Finance were appreciative that we were coming and talking earlier, and so some of the budget parts will be the background they will have, not have to start from scratch there. Okay, any other questions for Dawn or comments? All right, let's move on to the school and district action plans. Did you want to introduce those?
Yeah,
or-
just introduce Dr.
Okay,
Smith,
Dr.
who
Smith.
is orchestrating this portion of the
Sure.
agenda.
Good evening, everybody. There's no present mode.
It's weird. All right, just go with it.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right. So I wanted to talk to you tonight a little bit about how we're getting better and how we're getting better at getting better. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about how we are transitioning from what could be considered traditional strategic improvement to what is known as continuous improvement based upon the science. So our purpose tonight is to share our learning about the signs of improvement, but also review with you our district and building plans for improving the academic and social emotional outcomes for our students. Okay? So, strategic improvement. So you may remember that last year we focused our strategic improvement efforts on this acceleration framework. It was intended to address the unfinished learning identified in student achievement data, which was caused by the disruptions to teaching and learning during the pandemic. But as I mentioned to you then, this is not really something new or different. This is just good teaching, what is now referred to as high-quality instruction. What was different for us last year was the degree of focus and alignment we brought to implementing these practices. And by we, I mean classroom teachers, building and central office administrators, instructional coaches, academic interventionists, and special education staff. And as you know from the achievement data that we reviewed at our last meeting, we experienced a great deal of success as a result of those improvement efforts. Students are growing academically at historically high rates, and we've begun to narrow achievement gaps that have persisted for years. So how did we do it? The gist of the strategic improvement plans last year involved administrators, primarily with the support of coordinators and coaches, clearly communicating the vision for accelerated learning, and then helping staff to understand and implement the components consistently in the classroom. What's important to understand about this framework is that although we can treat each of the components as separate concepts, in practice, in the classroom, they need to be addressed simultaneously in an integrated way. And the best way to help teachers in doing that is to engage them in repeated cycles of data analysis, planning, implementation, and reflection using the components of the framework to guide that process. That work was done through a combination of program meetings, professional learning time, coaching cycles, and IETs, and was supported through the teacher evaluation process and the academic intervention process. The work was also highly individualized, depending upon the demands of the curriculum and the skill levels of both teachers and students. It's important to acknowledge that although we did meet with a great deal of success, it was certainly not perfect, and there is still room for improvement. But I want you to hold on to that imperfection for a moment, because that's where the transition from strategic improvement to continuous improvement will come in. And so I shared with you a plan for academic improvement, which, to be truthful, is pretty much a repeat of what we did last year. So I'm not going to go through that in detail. It worked, albeit imperfectly, so our plan is to institutionalize it. For the wellness part, I know Kim is slated to speak with you, I think, twice next month. And so she'll be available to talk more in depth about the plan and answer some questions that I received. I can give you a little bit of of an answer, but I really would prefer for Kim to be able to do that, if that's okay. I mean, the bottom line, Nicola, I think, is that what we're trying to do, so what's taking up everybody's time right now is crisis response. And what we're trying to do is to get ahead of that by being more proactive and identifying problems earlier. Because when we intervene too late, that's more of a time suck than what we're trying to do proactively, if that makes any sense. But I think Kim can talk a little bit more in depth about that later. That's okay? Ruth, you talked a little bit about, or asked questions a little bit about priorities and the number of steps we have in the plan. My only point is, if you remember last year, I think our plans were maybe 4 or 5 times the length they are now. So I've tried to really pare it down and capture exactly what we're doing.
Okay.
In terms of the academic part of that, we're not doing anything different than we did last year.
Okay.
So I don't think that it's burdensome. There does seem to be a lot under both our efforts to increase the social and emotional skills of our students as well as improve school climate. But again, with both of those things, these are ongoing things that we've been doing. So I don't think that it's an undue burden upon teachers. We certainly, as leaders and coordinators and coaches, are hyper mindful of what it is we're asking staff to do. Okay. So I think we've got a good plan, and certainly if it does become too overwhelming for people, we can certainly scale back on it. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I just, having it in front of me discreetly for this year without, in conjunction of seeing it from last year, and just trying to see how much of this is new, and you're talking about putting time to it. So is it reinforcement and kind of institutionalization of a program, or
Yes.
is it also new program, new learning that gets added onto that?
Right.
And I'm definitely aware that, there's a tendency, I think, for us to see this good and certainly want to push it forward, but I don't want to push it, or add to it to the point that it becomes like a diminishing return.
Sure, I
Yeah.
agree. So you're kind of
Yeah.
previewing what the rest of the slides are a little bit, okay?
Okay.
We can move to the next one. So at this point, I want to talk a little bit about strategy versus business as usual. So when a strategy to improve works, it needs to become business as usual. The way we supported teachers with the acceleration framework clearly had a positive impact on students. That support needs to continue and become business as usual, not an improvement strategy. And if you'll notice, I didn't call that plan I gave to you an improvement strategy. It's just a plan for academic achievement and social emotional learning. It's now going to become business as usual. But we also know that we still have variations in practice. So how do we narrow those variations to ensure equity and sustained improvement in learning? So if we could move along, that's where continuous improvement comes in. Next. Okay, so to start this conversation, I'd like to begin again with the acceleration framework, and you can see that on the left. As you can see, the broad categories involve many discrete teaching practices, and each of those can be broken down even further. I mean, just to give you an example, feedback. There are umpteen dozen books written on how to give effective feedback, and that's just one item I have up there. The point is that high-quality instruction involves a complex and sophisticated set of skills that have a high potential for variation among practitioners. To narrow that variation will undoubtedly take a lot of time and effort, but, let's move on to the next one. So what is the best way to approach this? Traditionally, schools have engaged in what is called strategic planning and have been doing this for decades. But across many human service professions, there has been a move away from that sort of planning to something called continuous improvement, which is based upon the emerging science of improvement, or improvement science. To quote the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, which has been pioneering this work, improvement science seeks to discern what works for addressing a particular problem, for whom, and under what set of specific conditions. It represents a field of study focused on the methods that facilitate or hinder efforts to improve quality in context-specific work processes and centers inquiry on the day-to-day problems of practice that have genuine consequences for people's lives. This approach has been widely adopted in the medical field and is now heavily influencing work in education. So how does continuous improvement differ from strategic improvement? So up here, what we have is kind of a comparison between traditional strategic improvement and what's known as continuous improvement. The terms they use are linear versus iterative planning. And what we're going to look at is the format, assumptions, dispositions, and how we use data. So in traditional linear strategic planning, it's a traditional format that delineates all of the improvement work that a school system is going to try to undertake in a year. It includes a combination of vision, mission, values, goals, and so forth, the traditional kind of template that you're used to seeing. With iterative planning, it's a non-traditional format, which you're going to see tonight, that attempts to represent the relationship between a theory of action and the mechanisms for change. And I'm going to talk about mechanisms for change in a little bit, because that's an important concept in continuous improvement. And we use nonlinear formats. These formats need to be constantly revised and updated. In terms of assumptions, traditional strategic planning, we think that problems are well defined and understood in advance, and what needs to be done to accomplish district goals, that is the solutions, is knowable in advance. Outcome metrics are reviewed at regular time intervals, and implementation is really a matter of compliance with the plan. In iterative planning, problems need to be researched to be understood, and what needs to be done to accomplish district goals isn't completely knowable in advance. Both outcome and process metrics are critical, but should be reviewed only when appropriate to the process. And educators need to learn their way into meaningful change. There's one thing on this chart I'd like you to take away, it's that statement. What we're trying to do is complex. And when we approach this from a compliance issue, teachers are simply just doing what we say when we're watching. What we need to do is to engage educators in the inquiry process so they themselves learn how the practice impacts students. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The dispositions in traditional strategic improvement is scientific management, breaking the work into component parts, monitoring and holding educators accountable, and managing formal processes. Whereas with iterative planning, it's really a disciplined inquiry approach, adopting a learning stance, taking a systems perspective, which I'm going to talk about also in a minute, possessing an orientation towards action. One of the phrases that we're now using is, what can you do by next Tuesday? Which is important. We want people to be action-oriented and to be doing. Capitalizing on the perspective of educators and persisting beyond initial improvement efforts. And for data, it's really the difference between simply looking at quantitative outcome data and using that to hold people accountable versus quantitative and qualitative data to measure small-scale tests of change. So you could go on. But going back, the bottom line is that we've been misguided to think that we know how to solve problems in advance and then can just write a plan and make sure it's implemented. I think intuitively we've always known this, but we just didn't know how to do it differently. We are now beginning to understand that we should approach problems from the perspective of inquiry and be very disciplined in following the inquiry process. And so what does that involve exactly? This is a visual representation of the inquiry process advocated by improvement science. It starts by spending time deeply understanding the problem and the system that produced it. In fact, one of the basic principles of improvement science is that a system is perfectly designed for the results it gets. So we need to get better at understanding and defining how that happens before we embark on solutions. And listed here are some tools that can be used to gain a deeper understanding of the problem in the system, things like root cause diagrams and empathy interviews. The next step at the top is to develop a shared theory of improvement, and again, there are tools to support us in doing that. Up to this point, the process may seem pretty familiar to those of you who have engaged in traditional strategic planning, but this is where continuous improvement departs from prior practice. Instead of thinking of this theory of action, thinking that this theory of action is the solution, and then scaling it up across a building or district, which is the traditional approach, continuous improvement uses rapid cycle prototyping and testing on a small scale before scaling up. For those of you familiar with design thinking, prototyping is kind of an experimental process where teams build prototypes to capture design concepts and then test them on users. With prototypes, teams can define and validate their designs so they can scale up the right practices. In a way, they slow us down to speed us up. By taking time to prototype our ideas, we avoid costly mistakes such as becoming too complex too early or sticking with a weak idea for too long. I think that kind of speaks to what you were getting at. So once you've developed a prototype, you move into the heart of the process, which is the plan, do, study, act cycles, or what we're calling PDSA cycles. So what you do is you take a prototype, plan how to implement it, and then study the effects. And I have to say, that's one of the things we didn't do very well with traditional strategic planning. And then once you've studied how that plan, do, study, act cycle went, you then act. And depending upon what happens, the act part of the cycle may lead to further refinements of the prototype or may necessitate going back to the drawing board because it's possible your theory of action was wrong, which is another principle of improvement science, that your initial theory is most likely wrong. These PDSA cycles are repeated, thus the iterative name to the process, and you don't scale up until you've perfected the prototype or you have the right prototype. Scaling up is also approached differently because we need to acknowledge that what worked in one set of circumstances with one set of teachers and students may not necessarily translate perfectly in different circumstances. So the scaling up needs to incorporate elements of the PDSA cycles as well. And so this is why we refer to this as a scientific inquiry approach. We develop and test hypotheses about teaching and learning and then learn from our mistakes, which is fundamentally different from thinking we know the answers in advance. Just to give you an example, and I hope, Jen, you don't mind, and you can talk to Jen more about this a little later. We had an initial theory going into your continuous improvement, and through the process of implementing this initial thought, we kind of had to back up and say, oh, the problem wasn't what we thought it was, yes. Right? So just to make it kind of concrete, by implementing, we discovered that our initial theory wasn't right. Traditionally, we probably would have written a strategic plan and just done it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back and rethink our theory of action. So, next slide. The last thing I want to leave with you is this other principle of continuous improvement, and it's called the toothpaste heuristic. So what you have here is a tube of toothpaste, but you'll notice we have some writing around it. The form, the characteristics, and the mechanism. So the form is how it's delivered. It can be delivered as a tube or a pump. My understanding is in some countries it comes in a tin or a tablet. That was news to me. And then there are the characteristics, how it tastes, how it feels, the color. But what cleans your teeth is the mechanism. It's the fluoride, the abrasives, and the detergents, right? It's not that the form and characteristics aren't important because they get you to brush your teeth, but those things don't clean your teeth. So when you think about teaching and learning, we don't want to confuse form and characteristics with the actual mechanism that causes learning, right? Let me give you an example. We tend to look at structures and processes that don't necessarily, may contain the mechanism, but may or may not contain the mechanism. And let me give you an example. Feedback. So sometimes people are taught the form of feedback, right? Have you ever heard of the sandwich? You give positive feedback, then corrective feedback, then end with positive feedback. That would be a form. The characteristics might be something, that it's specific, timely, relevant, descriptive. Those are the characteristics of the feedback. But when you really look at it, what makes a difference, the mechanism for learning, is when the teacher communicates to the student that they have confidence that they will achieve the goal. That's when feedback actually makes a difference. That's the mechanism. So just to kind of summarize, what we're trying to do through continuous improvement is get to the actual mechanism that causes learning. And I don't want you to walk away thinking that the form and characteristics aren't important. But again, they're only there to get to the mechanism, if that makes any sense. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is to have a little science fair, an improvement science fair. So what you notice around the room are some of the initial representations of what the schools are working on. Oh, wait, do you want to show the video? So when we were learning about this, we went through a simulation called the coin spinning simulation. Working in teams, we were all given various coins to spin, and we had to figure out who could spin it the longest. We were given, pennies, dimes, nickels, quarters, and we timed it on our phone, and we had to figure out who could spin it the longest and what were the factors that went into it, right? Why did certain people with certain coins able to get to the highest amount? So this is from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and kind of a debrief on how they use the coin tossing simulation to help people in healthcare understand this continuous improvement process.
What are some of the attributes of teams that are able to successfully spin their coins? What does it take to learn how to spin a coin really well?
Sure. When we ask teams, what got you to that longest spin, oftentimes they're very creative. So they define surface in lots of different ways. They try lifting a tablecloth over the table and trying it on just the bare table surface. They'll run out of the room and try a brushed concrete floor. They'll put a book down or a purse down and try it on lots of different surfaces. So they get as creative as they can possibly be about what that definition is of surface. Additionally, they try to run a lot of tests. And you have 15 minutes to spin, and you can actually get a lot of spins in that time. And so they try as many different things as they possibly can. Additionally, they start to create a theory. Sometimes they don't even know that they've created a theory. So sometimes the theory is around who at this table could be the best spinner, because not everybody is going to be a spinner. And so they'll run tests and they'll rule out who are the not so great spinners. And then they'll go get to the best spinner, and then they'll move on to their next theory, which is perhaps the quarter or the nickel or one coin over another is going to be a better spinning coin. So they'll test out the theory and try to rule out the coins that are not great spinning coins.
How much data do they collect? Like, what's enough data for them to decide to rule out one surface or one spinner or another?
So, well, first, not everybody ends up collecting the data. Some teams get so into the doing part of the PDSA cycle that they just do, and they're tracking so many spins at the same time that they're not going back and actually creating a prediction and actually tracking their data over time. Mm-hmm. If we were to ask them what was the thing that worked, they probably can't tell us because it wasn't documented. And so those are the teams that sort of come up short of like, actually, I don't know what worked. But those that actually did document, oftentimes they'll do one run of all the coins or one run of all the spinners, and then they get a hunch of which spinners or which coins are the best, and then they try it multiple times to try and get it reliable. Mm-hmm. And those teams that have the longest spinning coins tried one surface multiple times to get the longest spinning. So it might be 10 seconds, and then they try it again and it's 11, they try it again and it's 12, and then they feel really good about the fact that hey, we're consistently at a really high number of seconds. That's the one that's going to be the longest.
Excellent. So it sounds like teams that are successful collect a little bit of data, just enough.
Yeah.
And enough to build our confidence. We talk about that a lot in improvement. We want just enough data to get a higher degree of confidence that our change is going to result in improvement.
Exactly.
And it just made me think about the importance of asking questions, right? That's what helps us be creative and helps us build good theories is we're able to formulate questions. Who's the best spinner? Which surface is going to be best for us? Which coin is going to offer the longest spin?
And it allows us to explore an assumption without judgment against that assumption.
Yeah.
So with one of our teams, somebody was adamant that all those over the age of 50 were going to be the best spinners because they had a chance to spin coins in their childhood, whereas they thought that younger people at the table weren't going to have such great spinning skills. People could have easily looked at him and said, well, that's just a joke. But they actually said, hey, let's test that out. And it actually turned out that those over the age of 50 at the table were the best spinners. And so rather than just ruling out somebody's assumption as that's just an idea, everything's on the table to try out. And suddenly people felt like they belonged, they felt like their ideas were contributing, and it's because it was in the form of, hey, it's a question, let's learn about it.
So I know that when you set up the game, when you give people instructions, you give them that PDSA tracker that you want them to fill out. How much do people actually do that? You can be honest.
I would probably say about 50% of the time.
Pretty good.
I know. And we're asking people to do it very quickly. So in 15 minutes, you can run 20 different spins. That's an intense amount of tests for a small amount of time. And so to ask people to also be writing down what their prediction is, and like I said, they get so into the game and the doing that they don't stop to make the prediction or don't stop to actually see, did this work or did it not work, and then how are we going to iterate on it? However, when we debrief with them and we talk to them about what about in the real world? What if you were to have been running a project, and this is really about improving patients' lives, and then you actually move the dial, and your local government or a reporter or your leadership team comes to you and says, what was the secret sauce? What was the deciding factor? And you can't give them that answer. There's real implications from that.
So you're asking folks to collect a lot of data in a very short period of time. But how do folks manage that? What do they do?
So they are continually surprised at how easy it is that we gave them a blank run chart and you're just asking them with a pen and pencil to plot on a run chart. There's nothing that's stopping you from taking that same idea and going home, and you don't have to have Excel or any other type of program to produce a run chart for you. You could start on a piece of paper, and people have that realization a lot of, wow, this is way easier. I have no excuses of why I'm not measuring.
So, in your experience now, what's the longest spinning coin?
You know, that's an interesting point. In the situations where we've tested this, which has been in the U.S., so that, remember it's a quarter, a dime, a nickel, a penny. Generally, the longest spinning coin has been about 13 to 15 seconds. I don't know that I've seen something that went higher than 15 seconds, which is interesting because then that's the bounds of the system. That's the limit of how far we can go. So if we were to think about, we want a system that's going to get us higher than 15 seconds, we would have to look at completely redesigning that system. Changing the surface, maybe changing the coins, putting different spinners in place. Probably changing the coins, I bet, is probably the biggest redesign piece we would need in that system in order to get it to perform different results. And how often are we trying to get a current system to perform at results higher than it can, because we're not actually looking at how do we redesign the system. So,
yeah.
There's a lot packed into that video, but I think it gives you a sense of the type of process that we're trying to move toward. And just to summarize with some big ideas, a system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Your theory of action most likely is wrong. Don't confuse forms and characteristics with mechanisms, and we need to support the process of teachers and schools learning their way into meaningful change. So at this point, what I'd like to do is, again, have this little improvement science fair. I'm going to ask our building principals to man these various charts. And what I'd like you to do is to try to rotate around and just have a conversation about what aspects of continuous improvement they're working on. Maybe 5-10 minutes per, if we could.
Per site?
Yeah, per site.
Okay.
All right? All right, everybody. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to tell you, Joey, you want to share with anybody how your group did? Yeah.
Well, we destroyed the Guinness Book record.
We did.
Even though Dr. Smith didn't completely believe us, but we did.
Yeah.
Remember what the number was?
It's like 32. Yeah.
What coin did you use?
Quarter.
Was your spinner over 50?
Yeah, yeah.
One of our spinners was just turning 50. I forget if it happened before we did that or not.
Okay.
Okay, everybody.
All right, so can we limit it maybe to 5 minutes?
Five-ish.
Set like a dinger for us?
I will do
Keep us
that.
on our,
I will do that.
I'll set a timer, Chuck.
Would you? Thank you. And I'll just give you a signal to rotate.
Okay.
And try not to all congregate at one place. Right? Just,
No, we go separate.
yeah, go separate.
Yeah, perfect. That's a good start.
all right.
I'll meet you over there.
Hi, hi.
More time to go through 5 minutes.
All right. Okay, should we get started? Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
The outer
So, basically, we kind of
adjusting,
went backwards.
retesting.
So, one of the things that we started off with time practice. A lot of it started with like questions we were asking. So we were literally like the students. This was during workshop.
We were still trying to see how many
Asking them what we were doing. There's a little bit of lack of clarity.
you want to wait until you practice
So
and
this
then
probably
we'll
is
get
before the pandemic, right? I mean, this has been something we've been actually studying for a while. And so you can see, as Chuck said, we've kind of been revising it. Even actually, we have another meeting this week that we adjusted it even further. So I'm going to throw another post-it note on here. But so basically, that kind of led us to teacher clarity and the importance of being clear and making sure that the students are clear what their learning goals are. And with teacher clarity, for when he was talking about high quality instruction, so teacher clarity specifically, learning intentions and success criteria are two pieces of teacher clarity. And so that's kind of what we're thinking of as high quality instruction. So we're really kind of practice kind of reflects that, and action reflects that, and everything that we're observing and testing, like Chuck was saying, kind of revolves around that concept of teacher clarity. So I can kind of give you, I see it with my 3-year-old. Yep. Are they not a good match? Did I you were dancing? I had written it. Yeah. But that she, yes. And I will say, that's one of the things that I want you to think. So, this is feedback. So, it needs to be is great teaching. That's one of the teachers. Consistency. Students. Yeah, that's one of the things that
Also getting to look at schedules, collecting data for teacher attendance, sharing research.
How long is it?
This kind of like just doesn't really show up.
So right now where we are,
You're at your 1 minute warning.
You're so good at that. We started this
One person from every department involved, so that hopefully will go to wider spread. And where we get some prototype. So here's kind of outline what we're doing. Getting stopping is kind of where we are with each department, how they're doing the work. So the IL is to one of those things. So really kind of some information about them.
And that's the thing that
have an expert learner where they think they are.
we're sort of trained to jump right in and we never know the solution and there's so many
Initial focus area. Okay, you can move to your next location.
I think to make this easier, if we could rotate this way.
Time to rotate.
You're standing there.
Your timer for your next one already started.
Okay.
You're going to miss it.
Thank you.
Different ideas.
You're really good.
You gotta move things on.
Tell me something I don't already know.
But nobody's listening.
No one's listening. It is the story of my life, Jen.
We spent too long talking about it real quick.
Oh, good, see?
I'm moving.
All right. So, our high-quality instruction is really focused on teacher clarity. So,
All right.
We don't want to tell that people.
know what it is. The two pieces of so it all kind of started, I want to say, sometime before COVID, and we were paying attention and we were noticing kids who were
With regard to that,
asking these questions, and they're just questions that,
take this right here.
as an evaluator, probably have asked very similar questions, right? And so it wasn't done with any intent on focusing on teacher clarity, but based on the responses we were getting from the students, we knew something was just wrong.
So we did some work over
Also
the summer.
recommended the same thing. There's a difference between men and so writing and reading.
right.
So we started coming up with trauma practice and that's practice every time we involved in it as we try out different strategies and testing the theory. So basically, it was around, it started with our scores just don't seem to reflect them, not just our teachers. Where's the disconnect? And so, came up with this very fashion and to understand what they were learning, do I understand why they were learning, and then I need to do the accomplishment time students will have agency and leadership in the process. And so we've been testing that, and so it's kind of hard, this was kind of built into my time since then, where I've done a lot of like, what's the training more professional, it's playing around, so it's kind of what's going on in the right now. So instead of jumping into trying to say exactly, so we've been using like leadership meetings and teams to kind of like test and teach us something else. So for example, one of the things was playing out how to share learning intentions. And by sharing the learning intentions at the beginning of grade, having them write it down, is having an impact on students' response, being able to clearly articulate what it is they're learning.
Okay, this is your 1 minute warning.
That goes by fast. It's like, how are you supposed to do this? So that makes a huge difference. It does. Yeah. What's that? So anyways, another thing that we're doing is one teacher is trying to take a repertoire of mini lessons on like a chart, and so now she's tracking it.
So what we said was, why don't we figure out
It's a big step for a place where teachers are coming up with their own puzzle problems, and they've got a process to evaluate, right?
Didn't have the box anymore. Correct. Right, so they used to be in that box, where they had to kind of march to the box.
We're on the countdown.
This gives them the freedom.
Yeah, and to play around with it. Yeah, I was just, and then so always going back if they're still same questions.
Yeah, it's been fun. So the interaction.
All right, folks, you can switch to your next locale.
Trying to test
The timer is starting now.
Can we have like 7 minutes for each of these areas? Can we do that? Maybe 2 more minutes?
2 more minutes?
I feel like we're getting cut in the middle of everything, and this is honestly like, for me, the best part of all this.
All right, you get 2 more minutes at your current station.
Okay.
2 additional minutes.
They already left me, I'm customerless.
Take a breath.
You're dangerous.
Well, then I'll switch with you the wrong way. Because I have it as caffeine. You have it
And again, your 1 minute warning.
So, that is the goal. The problem with practice that
Mine lasts that 5 minutes. So I lost
provide more support and monitor how those expectations are being set, the expectations are being met. I sort of started backwards. This is like the goal that comes from these things. So maybe it will help if I So as I said, we believe that if we clearly communicate our expectations about protection,
That's time.
Nobody listens to me. What am I doing?
I got it easy.
Exactly. Really try to capture
Oh my God, we're gonna be here all night. I can't keep doing it.
We believe that we can play a very big
Would you like me to start the clock on the next 7-minute round?
She just came.
You guys are on the right.
I mean, unless you're ready to leave. So in order to, this is what we believe the problem is, right? And so part of this iterative process is developing this theory, testing is buying, right? Right, so conducting empathy interviews. Empathy interviews one-on-one or in small groups with people who are in, right? So teachers, administrators, staff, have to work on self-compassion.
But the thing like they said is,
They're very low.
Maybe it's better to be longer at one station than shorter at every one.
You know, we had a theory of action. Right? The street data is giving us
They needed more time.
disconfirming evidence of our theory, and so perhaps we need to modify our theory.
I'm just going to share that at the end.
I'm just still floating off of unified sports, so it's all good.
That was the best. Oh my gosh.
that's where we are. We're out of Isabel, thanks for
That's mentioned last year's prom.
So we don't have all the bucket data of everything. Hi, how are you? I got one more. This is what we worked on this summer. And so you built it.
They just
Time the teachers to get we're just provide support, meeting those expectations, which is monitor how that's going. And the reason is that we believe if we can meet our expectations, monitor them, provide support, then the expectations will be met. And the goal really is to have students attendance record for 95%.
The timer went off a long time. I already started the next revolution. We're halfway through it. But I'm being lax in my timekeeping.
We want to say
You got it.
We have 3 minutes in this revolution.
So 3 minutes, and then we're going to invite people to go back.
Okay.
How about identifying
You did 2 revolutions out of 5.
And so we're also going to and also what we believe now we're going to test it. Empathy interviews, which are essentially interviews, either one-on-one teachers, perhaps secretarial staff, or sub-coverage, administrators. We have been reviewing spreadsheets trying to see if this has, possibly, yeah, we've begun, right, exactly. Yes, schedule, so looking at how many modified schedules we have, in a year, in a grade level in a building. We've been collecting data from teacher attendance, and we've looked at things like illnesses, school business, where they're picking up other reasons other than professional development. Sometimes we have meetings during the day, curriculum work sometimes it's done, and also our professors.
So we have 2 design thinking processes going on. We have kind of the instructional leader.
So we've been really focused on the collection of data from the somebody where we're just moving into this with the schedules and this Chuck is also
One of the hallmarks So I see what's going on there all day long. That's cool. It's such an exciting area of the school. There's so many that is
It is something that, like, when we looked at the stuff, it's someone's but I still, we have to use and even besides just, also just bringing up the question, how often?
We're at the 30-second warning.
30 seconds, thank you.
But we don't have schedules to pull kids across the building because they need resources for an upcoming event.
Successes with goal setting, what's been working for people to build from that our template process.
Right.
That's
Right.
real quick.
It's just, and probably synopsis.
Does that make sense?
Right, yeah, right.
This is something that.
That's it, that's time. Hey folks, we're going to return to our seats. We're going to pick up the conversation here.
Yeah, and some of it's like the goals within the class, within a unit, and kind of how they want us to grow, whatever layers to that even, and that's been a lot of the conversation of where does it sort of
You're engaged.
Sorry, I was on.
I
missed two of them, right.
Yeah, this is, and so we're, I mean, this, so,
Because I
you
only
know,
got to, yeah, okay. Yeah, well,
So I'm glad to see you were all engaged. I'm just wondering if anybody had any thoughts, questions, comments?
it's a lot to take in for me, and I didn't even get to all of them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just need some
It's
time
pretty
to.
engaging, pretty interesting,
Good.
and everybody seemed pretty excited about it.
Yes, I think so.
They were all very upbeat and very,
Yeah.
very excited about doing
I
it.
think this process is more meaningful for everybody.
Yeah, it seems it, and they seem very, that came very clear, that it was more meaningful.
Good, great.
What's
Thank you.
the genesis of you taking this on? Did it come from the last year's?
So we have been working with an organization that Kevin introduced us to. It's called the Partnership for Educational Leadership. They were the group that supported us through the acceleration framework. And last year, while we were talking about the acceleration framework, we became aware that they're very into strategic planning, but reframing it as something different. And so through our conversations, we became somewhat intrigued by it, and so we decided that would be the focus of our Leadership Institute this summer. And that's how we learned about the process, and now we're trying it.
Well, it's music to my ears. I ask the same question all the time about, it's great that up here we think everything works, but when it comes down to our students, it doesn't matter what we all think, it's really how they receive it.
Yes.
And I think that I think you guys have finally hit it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And I loved hearing from all of you, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of you. And Chuck, no offense, but I would have loved to have heard more from them.
I know.
About how it's all working.
I kind of felt like you needed to have the background for it.
I know.
Yeah.
I was saying to Maria, it's almost like going to a CEU class, and they spend so much time on the theory and the development and the history part, and this much time on the practical part of how I can treat. And I'm like, but
I don't think you can really get a flavor of what the schools are doing in less than 10 or 15 minutes. So maybe we could set up another time where you could have more in-depth conversations, or we could even use teaching and learning for that. And Anybody from the board could join.
That's probably the best place.
That would be fun. That would be good.
We would
You
love
can
that.
just concentrate on one or
One at a
many.
time.
I'd even love to hear from
Yes.
one of the IL teams that are, or one of the IET teams that are working
Sure.
on these areas in relation to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that would, as we're thinking for the second half of the school year, well, because this is round one of, what is supposed to be an iterative and dynamic process, so we can maybe have a redo and just see where we are, what we've learned in the process, about the process, and also about, the various problems we're focused on, and we'll bring in some different players.
Yeah.
So, good.
Nicola had a great idea too, sorry.
That's okay.
Of like jumping in and joining, like one of your all's meetings.
Oh, sure.
When everybody is, that way, right? I know schedules are crazy, but
Yeah.
to like, truly understand and be in the middle of it and.
Yeah, that absolutely, just
Kevin is
one
now
way.
joining our meetings around this too, so the more the merrier.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's really helpful.
Any other comments? All right.
Keep it up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks to
Ruth
everybody.
told me she likes it when I geek out.
Just goes to show, what my background is.
Right? Seriously, you're the geek out, and on the practical, that's like.
Tell me more about this theory. Do you have a really big book
You
on
guys
it?
had a private session. Best of us.
Okay. So where are we? Are on discussion approved, right? Okay,
Yes.
action items. The Wilton High School Costa Rica trip. We need a motion to approve the trip as presented at our last meeting.
I so move to approve the trip
Okay.
as proposed in the last meeting.
I second.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? All right. Anybody want to go?
Yes.
Everybody.
Good babysitter.
All right, and how about the Wilton High School German exchange trip? Is there a motion to approve that exchange as presented at the last board meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Nicola.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, again, unanimous. Thank you. And the last action item is to discuss and approve policy 6146, performance-based graduation requirements. All right, we have seen and talked and sent questions. Are there any remaining questions or comments that we should go over before a vote? Is there a motion to approve policy 6146 as revised?
I move to approve policy 6146 as revised.
Are you good?
Are you good?
Yeah, I was just saying, it's still got the applied arts courses in there. Does that need to be, are we
We
calling that
changed the
something
name,
else?
we
To-
changed the name to Career and Technical.
To CTE, so we'll just make the technical edit to CTE. Okay.
Does that get at it?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so Ruth, you want to withdraw your motion?
I do. I withdraw my motion.
Okay.
And
Anybody
I-
want to make another one?
I will make another one. I move to approve policy 6141.
Six, no.
Do you want 6146? With the additional edit
Okay.
just discussed.
Okay. Changing applied
Applied
arts
arts
to
CTE.
career.
Career and technical ed, yeah.
Yes, career and
CTE.
technical education. Yes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any more discussion? All in favor? Okay. Done. There's a calendar of next meetings. I do want to say that we are hoping to have an executive session on the November 3rd night to update the board on negotiations. That would be an executive session. And we'll set a time before the meeting. I just don't know quite yet, whether it be 6 or 6:15 or 6:30. We'll have to figure that piece out. But if you could get that on your calendars, that would be great. And that's just an update. There's no approval there. It's an executive session, and we're not through them, but it is an update. And then the rest of our board meetings, and the long-range planning meeting. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is?
So long-range planning, as we've met several times over the last several years, it was the long-range planning process that really gave birth to the Portrait of the Graduate. So we're going to do a couple of things on that night. One is just, again, update the committee about Portrait of the Graduate. That is, I think, on the minds of many across the district, which is great, and there's a lot of toeholds developing in the curriculum, so that's well underway. So given the name of the committee, Long Range Planning, we're going to take the second part of the meeting to talk about what's next. And so the whole intention of that is to try to look over the horizon and to continue to think forward as we continue to evolve as a school district. So we're going to try to engage in a process to get us to continue to, down the road.
Perfect. Is that a 7 o'clock start or?
It'll probably be 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
Try to do 6 to 8.
Okay. Are there comments from the public?
No.
All right, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good job.